Hello, I'm Marianne Fulker and I'm the CEO of Perth's leading think tank, the Committee for Perth. Welcome to FACTBase Talks, an online series where you get to hear the latest research from our organisation. FACTBase is a long-standing joint venture research program between the Committee for Perth and the University of Western Australia. We are the leaders in delivering tangible research that drives structural, cultural and behaviour change on issues that matter to the people of Greater Perth. To date, the partnership has produced more than 80 pieces of research, creating a knowledge base on issues that affect our region and its future. These include the economy, global competitiveness, transport and mobility, gender equality, and the region's demography and geography, to name but a few. Each of these is available on our website for download free of charge. I trust you find the information and analysis contained in this presentation stimulating and that it adds to your understanding of a complex issue that affects us all.
Hi everyone and welcome to FACTBase 79, the second research piece in the Race to the Top project. This bulletin follows on from FACTBase 78, which was released on 3rd of February this year and examined labour market and potential solutions to address immediate to short-term skill shortages. FACTBase 79 is about preparing for the future. To understand projected future employment growth, this bulletin examines past employment trend by industry and occupation to give insights to employment concentration and workforce composition in WA and Greater Perth. On labour demand, the projected employment growth by industry for Greater Perth from 2020 to 2025 is provided. In addition, occupations which are projected to have strong demand to 2025 are explored. On labour supply, this bulletin examines the composition of the WA workforce and future stock of worker. For domestic supply, I focus on university and vet enrolments, as well as apprenticeship and traineeship commencements. For overseas labour supply, I provide forecasts of visas lodged and grants. In FACTBase 79, I bring together data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the Department of Education, Skills and Employment, Department of Home Affairs, National Skills Commission, and National Centre for Vocational Education Research. Okay, looking at past trends first, here are examples of employment by industry over time for residents of Perth, Inner and Mandurah. These two areas are selected because they are most contrasting. In the bulletin, I also looked at the industry breakdown for other geographical areas. While healthcare and social assistant is one of the major employing industries for many residents of Perth, the data shows spatial differences in employment growth for other industries. If you can look at the left-hand side graph, you can see that residents of Perth Inner are typically employed in healthcare, the purple shaded area, and professional and scientific industry, which is the light pink shaded area, and this has been fairly consistent over 21 years. In comparison, residents of Mandurah, as shown on the right-hand side graph, are typically employed in health, the purple shaded area, mining, mauve shaded area, and construction, the light red area. Spatial differences is very noticeable across occupations. The left-hand side graph shows residents of Perth Inner are highly represented in professional occupations. It can be seen by the orange area. In comparison, residents in Mandurah, the right-hand side graph, are more likely to work as technicians and trade, the aqua area, professional, orange area, and machinery operators and drivers, the blue area. Not shown on this slide, but is covered in the bulletin, other areas in Perth, such as northeast, southeast, and southwest, have high concentrations of workers in professionals and trade-related occupations. So the data suggests that future labour demand may be filled by residents in specific geographical areas. Now, turning our attention to projected employment growth out to 2025, the forecast from the National Skills Commissions shows there are similarities between Australia, as shown on the left-hand side graph, and Greater Perth, as shown on the right-hand side graph, particularly among the top 5 growth industries. This suggests that Greater Perth will be competing with other states and territories for similar workers. Focusing on Greater Perth, overall, Greater Perth is projected to grow an additional 82,100 workers between 2020 and 25. The top 5 industries are healthcare and social assistance, which is forecast to grow an additional 25,500 workers, mining an additional 13,500 workers, education and training an additional 9,000 workers, professional, scientific and technical services an additional 7,500 workers, and accommodation and food services an additional 6,500 workers. These top 5 industries account for over 50% of the total projected employment growth for Greater Perth. As you can see, there are smaller employing industries such as electricity, gas, water and waste services, and construction. They are also projected to have a sizable employment growth, and these industries may struggle to find additional workers. Growth in health and accommodation and food services industries, which have historically relied on temporary migrants, may struggle to find workers if this source of labour is restricted in the near future. The left-hand side graph here shows occupations that are projected by the National Skills Commission to have strong future demand. Among these occupations, 46% are professional, 16% are technicians and trades, and 15% are community and personal service workers occupations. The right-hand side graph shows the skill level associated with occupations that are projected to have strong future demand. 54% of these occupations fall within the skill level 1, while a further 20% are skill level 4 occupations. Skill level 1 occupations are commensurate with a bachelor's degree or higher. An example of occupation in this skill group includes electrical and mining engineers, middle school and vocational education teachers, welfare workers, and medical radiation therapists. Skill level 4 occupations are commensurate with a certificate 2 or 3, and examples of the type of occupations include age or disabled carers, delivery drivers, and family daycare workers. So in summary, the projected demand growth we've seen here across industry reflect past employment growth. The question is, does WA have the workforce to meet future demand growth? An important consideration here is the composition of WA's workforce and future stock of labour from student enrolments and overseas workers. And these are the things that I will be looking at next. Here are gender differences, example of gender differences at an occupational level. As example, the left-hand side graph shows there are more men than women employed as technicians and trades workers. The gender differences in 2000 was around 66%, but this has reduced to 58% in 2021. The right-hand side graph shows that there are more women than men employed in community and personal service worker occupations. The gender difference in 2000 was 32%, and this has increased to 40% in 2021. Not shown here, but is covered in the bulletin, women are also highly represented in clerical and administration and sales occupations. Men are highly represented in machinery operators and drivers occupations, as well as labourers occupations. Gender differences in the workforce are reflected by differences in post-school studies. The graph shows enrolments by gender for 2 educational fields, information technology, the left-hand side graph, and health, the right-hand side graph. For information technology, the number of female enrolments declined from 2001 to 2019. For health, you can see that the number of female enrolments in this field has increased over time. Not shown here, but is covered in the bulletin, the gender differences is also observed in vocational education training and apprenticeship and traineeship positions. For example, there are more men than women apprentices and trainees in mining, construction, and manufacturing. There are more women apprentices and trainees in accommodation, administrative, and health industry than men. As these students represent the future workforce, we can expect the gender difference in occupation and industry to continue. This graph here shows the share of potential future supply of workers by fields of education and university enrolments. While there are encouraging signs of future supply in health, as shown by the orange line, and education, as shown by the brown line, there are concerns over the declining share of university enrolments in engineering and related technologies and information technology, as shown by the dark lines at the bottom of the graph. So the proportion of university enrolments in engineering and related technologies declined from 7% in 2001 to 5% in 2019. The total enrolment share in information and technology declined from 6% in 2001 to only 2% in 2019. These two fields of education already have a small share of total enrolments, hence their decline is a concern. Vocational education and training enrolments in engineering and related technologies remain relatively stable over the 4 years between 2016 and 2020. So far, I've given you an overview of the future domestic labour supply. I'll now focus on overseas labour supply. The forecasts are based on international and WA border restrictions as of November 2021. Given the changing nature of COVID, ongoing changes to international and WA border restrictions, and the uncertainty around demand for visas, we can expect a high degree of volatility in overseas labour demand going forward. The demand for visa is captured here via the number of visas lodged. The offshore component is key for future labour supply, as historically, this represents a large share of total visas lodged. We'll first look at future supply for unskilled visas. The forecast shows considerable volatility for future supply of international students, as shown by the left-hand side graph, and working holiday makers, as shown by the right-hand side graph. Now, these visa holders typically take up casual and seasonal jobs. From the left-hand side graph, the red line shows significant decline in the actual number of offshore student visas lodged between 2019, where just a bit over 9,500 visas were lodged, and 2020, where just under 4,500 visas were lodged. Under a status quo scenario, the number of students visa lodged is forecast to remain around 5,000 until 2026, and that's represented by the black line. However, the large difference between the upper bound, as you can see from the purple line, and the lower bound, which is represented by the blue line, reflects volatility. Now, what the upper bound represents is the maximum forecast increase in the number of student visa lodged out to 2026. And the lower bound represents the maximum number of decline in student visa lodged out to 2026. Ideally, we would like the gap between the upper and the lower bound to be as narrow as possible to give us stability going forward. We'll now turn our attention to future supply of temporary skills workers. The short-term visa, the left-hand side, allows migrants to work in WA for up to 2 years. The medium-term visa, the right-hand side graph, allows migrants to work in WA for up to 4 years. The actual number of short-term visa grants increased between 2018 and 19, but since 2019, there's been a modest increase. And this is reflected in the forecast figures, where the increase in the availability of short-term skilled workers to WA increased from around 1,200 in 2021 to just over 3,000 in 2026. The number of medium-term visa grants is forecast to increase from just above 1,600 in 2021 to just a bit over 3,700 in 2026. Given the volatility in the visa grants between 2018 and 21, the upper range, the purple line, and the lower range, the blue line, around the forecast number is quite wide. The volatility is consistent, I think, with media reports of uncertainties for businesses with access to workers. Given that the Australian government only removed international border restrictions around mid-December last year for temporary visa holders, we'll need to wait a little bit, a few more months, I think, to see if this has any effect on the inflow of workers. Overall, the main takeaway from FACTBase 79 are as follows. The projected employment growth to 2025 is consistent with past employment trends. Australia, like many developed nations, has an ageing workforce. However, the effect is not uniform across all industries, with some industries such as healthcare and social assistance, professional, scientific and technical services are able to keep workers on beyond their retirement age. This is covered in detail in FACTBase 79. Geographical and gender differences in employment across industries and occupations suggest that future growth will be met by specific groups of workers. The gender differences we've seen here in the workplace is reflected in post-school education with enrolments in universities, vocational education and training, and apprenticeship and traineeship, exhibiting clear gender differences for a number of fields of education. The future supply of overseas worker will be associated with a fair degree of uncertainty. Some of the factors contributing to this could be future COVID outbreaks, prolonged or changing border restrictions, as well as uncertainty around demand for visas. Overall, planning for future workforce will require understanding the current composition of the state's workforce, such as age, gender, and the proportion of new labour market entrants as covered, included as graduates, and experienced workers as captured by existing workforce and migration. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to FACTBase Talks. Our research is available on our website to download free of charge, and you will find this bulletin and other bulletins related to the future of work and all other areas that the Committee for Perth covers on Perth and its future available there.